of Girls with Knowledge, Inc., a 501c3 whose mission is to provide resources of empowerment globally to the world's most marginalized to help them discover and fulfill their fullest potential and affect positive change. Our goal is to shape young social activists and global business leaders who respond to human need and fight for human rights around the world. So needless to say, today's conversation is extremely important to us here at GWK, as I know it is to you as well. As the global pandemic persists, it's time we start recognizing the complex role that food plays in the health of our communities and the planet. Many questions surround COVID-19, from where it originated, to whether our food supply can withstand it, to the link between plant-based diets and the environment, human behavior, and even future pandemics. Today, we will get into all of these topics. We have an esteemed group of panelists that I would like to introduce so that we can get this conversation started. First up is Dr. Sweta Chakraborty, and she is a risk and behavioral scientist whose work is motivated by the need for clear, credible, evidence-based communication to urgently and proactively manage the risks that threaten human security and well-being, from climate change to COVID-19. She is a correspondent for multiple publications, book author, globally recognized keynote speaker, and is regularly interviewed on global media outlets such as CNN and BBC. Welcome, Sweta. Next up, we have Deanna Dahlinger. Deanna is a registered dietitian, nutritionist. She works in acute care with Ascension Providence Hospital, specializing in neurology and oncology, and provides nutrition support and interactive classes. She also runs her own virtual private practice with a non-diet approach, utilizing food to nourish, heal, and enjoy. Welcome, Deanna. Our third panelist is Udi Lazimy. He is currently the Global Director of Sourcing and Sustainability for eatjust, Inc., one of the world's fastest growing food tech companies. At eatjust, Inc., Udi leads the company's efforts to improve their overall impact on the planet, society, and human health. He also oversees eatjust, Inc.'s entire ingredient sourcing program, including the commercial supply of thousands of metric tons of responsibly sourced agricultural commodities. Welcome, Udi. Our fourth guest is Jillian Semaan. She is the Director of Food and Environment at Earth Day Network, where she focuses on addressing the impact animal agriculture has on the planet, addressing the impact animal agriculture has on the planet. She advocates for plant-based diets for the health of environment and self. Previously, as Chief of Staff of Civil Rights at the United States Department of Agriculture, she was able to create and implement government initiatives that focus on sustainable agriculture in food deserts and disadvantaged communities. Welcome, Jillian. And last, but certainly not least, Caroline Wimberly is the Senior Campaign Manager at 50 by 40. She has a diverse background in the food industry and nonprofit sector. From working at 2 Manhattan restaurants to the woman-led company Purely Elizabeth and an anti-hunger organization, it always comes back to the food system. Welcome, Caroline. So in addition to being on Zoom, we are streaming live today on Facebook. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please submit them there. We may not be able to get to everyone's question, but we hope that your questions will be answered in our dialogue. So let's get started. Okay. So, to all of our panelists, you all have very diverse and different backgrounds. Can each of you very briefly tell us the type of effect that COVID-19 has had on our food system from your industry's perspective? Caroline, I'm happy to start with you.
Sure. Thanks so much, Marcelle. And happy to be here and for Earth Day Network to have organized this. It's wonderful and timely. I think this issue, I'm glad to see this issue of food systems becoming more on the more on the radar of more people because of the impacts of COVID-19 and supply chains and what you're seeing in your grocery store, farmer's market, and not. That certainly has been very good. Obviously, the impacts on individuals and people not having access to certain food is very troubling. It's exposing all of these weaknesses in the system that we have in the industrial-based system with these hugely long supply chains that are really problematic for the climate, for human rights, for animal welfare, biodiversity, et cetera. So it's been shining a light. I'm hoping it continues to shine that light. So it's on more people's radar, because it's just so important to so many aspects of our society. So I'm glad it's getting attention, and I hope that continues and more people engage in the issues.
Thank you. Jump on in there, Jillian.
Awesome. So for me, like Caroline, it's the exposure of the limitations of a food system that really has failed to nourish the world's population. So we're seeing complete flaws in the system. And so being able to address those flaws is something that I think that we definitely need to do, and we'll talk more about that today. But it's really about just failing to nourish the world as a whole. We're seeing different groups of people being able to have access, but not the world entirely.
Okay, Udi, what about you?
Yeah, it's been really exciting. Thanks so much for the question and for including me from kind of the plant-based food industry side. It's an incredibly rapidly growing segment in food, and we've seen a lot of impact from the coronavirus and kind of the times that we're in, some extremely good and some challenging. And I'd say the really beneficial aspect of it is the fact that people are seeing our products in retail grocery store shelves across the country in larger numbers than ever before. We're in thousands of points of distribution, and our sales have skyrocketed. We've had almost 100% growth in places like Whole Foods and over 80% growth at Walmart since January till May. It's been unbelievable. But the unfortunate truth is that people aren't able to access products such as ours, which are incredibly sustainable and have health benefits and so on, in restaurants and food service channels. So that's the challenge that we see now, which, from a business perspective would be awesome to see that kind of growth. And those kind of companies like, fast food chains are knocking on our door to try to get our product in their doors. But unfortunately, the people that I think need products like ours and so many other healthy and sustainable products, the most, and who need access to those kind of products the most, are unable to access them right now in the kind of, lower cost channels of food service. But that'll change, I think, as things open up. But overall, it's exciting. It highlights the challenges with a centralized food system. It highlights a lot of challenges with zoonotic diseases connected to our food system, which, I'm happy to talk about as well. But so there's a lot of bonus and a lot of plus and some challenges as well, for sure.
Definitely. We're really excited to get into that, to really dig into that today. Dr. Shata.
Thank you. This is a really important and timely question, and I'm going to come at it from a slightly different vantage point. So I would argue that it's our bad behaviors around food consumption and interaction with animals that is the reason we're experiencing COVID in the first place. The planet is warming, we're increasing in population, and that is resulting in habitat exploitation and increased interaction with animals that historically humans have never engaged with. Talking about porcupines or civet cats, snakes, these types of exotic animals that in nature we wouldn't come across through our evolutionary past, nor would we force them to interact with each other, which is exactly what happened in Wuhan, China at these wet markets. So because of encroachment of the habitats, because of increasing population, because of bad food habits and wildlife trade, we are finding these very unnatural environments happen that we as humans have perpetuated. And so now you've created these perfect breeding grounds for zoonotic disease transfer from animal to human and then human to human transmission. These are viruses, coronaviruses have existed within animals forever, and they've never bothered humans. They've only now been exposed and have made that zoonotic disease jump from animal to human because of practices that are very unnatural that we are continuing to support globally. And so there's an opportunity here to really look at the food supply system and our interactions with the animals that we cohabit the planet with, and really mitigate against those bad behaviors. There's no need to interact with these animals and put them in these weird situations where their inner viruses and microbiomes and are able to mix and mutate. That's how COVID-19 came into being. That's how it was released, how it mutated and then was released. And this is a mild virus by virology standards. So you can imagine if we continue to add people to the planet and continue to engage with these animals and this type of wildlife trade, what is waiting for us ahead? That's something I hope we talk about, like proactively preventing against that.
Got it. I know that we're going to dig into the psychology of it all with you. So I'm interested to get down into that nitty gritty as well. Deanna.
Yeah, so to piggyback off of kind of what everyone has said here, the past few months have really revealed those structural vulnerabilities from food availability, prices, vendors, and then on the personal level of accessibility, geographical access. And so I'm seeing a lot of this take a toll on the nutrition status of my patients. So I actually had an elderly patient last week who had significant weight loss. And so she began to tell me how she had minimal support, a support system around her. And so she'd been frightened to go to the grocery store. She's only been left her house twice since March. And so she's been primarily living off canned foods, frozen foods, and just making do with what she has. And so it's extremely heartbreaking. And I'm seeing more and more of this. So with elderly patients, with immunocompromised patients, and in addition with patients with those comorbid complications such as heart disease or diabetes who are fearful of going out and getting food. And so on my end, it's more that these patients are gaining or end up with these nutrition deficiencies, or even worse, become malnourished, which in the long run weakens their bodies to fight off infections like COVID. So it's kind of just an endless circle going on here.
Definitely. I totally agree. I'm excited about this conversation. So I'll kick it off with you, Jillian. As COVID-19 spreads across the world, the stability of the nation's food system is coming into question. In terms of our food supply, can we really be sustainable and keep shelves stocked? And can we really be safe as meatpacking workers are dying from COVID on the front lines? Tell us about it from your perspective.
Sure. So yes, the stability of our food system is in question, no doubt. Supply and demand have been disrupted. But the reality is that this is an anxious time for everyone, whether you're a farmer, whether you're a consumer, whether you're on the supply chain side, whether you're a meat packer. It's an anxious time for everyone. But what I do really believe is that we do have a truly resilient food system, and we can prevent a food crisis. We may not have the same options moving forward, but our food supply is still intact. What I'm more concerned about is the price spike. And COVID is amplifying just that. We're seeing, in parts of the States where there's price gouging happening, where some grocers are marking up their products at 300% more. It's a really hard time for folks. Unemployment rate is at a high. Last year, the African swine fever wiped out about 25% of the world's pig population, causing food prices to spike in China by 15 to 22%. And if we take a closer look at that, when we talk about the bottom line, when we talk about how much we're spending and the lack of income that's happening right now, consumers want to know how they're going to spend money, how they're going to feed their families. And when you're seeing these price spikes, it is not something that we should worry about. There's so much to worry about right now, whether it's physical health, mental health, whether it's depleted grocery stores, whether it's your kids are going back to school. There's so much on everyone's mind. So when you think about the food that you're eating at a grocery store and going into these grocery stores and buying meat and having to worry about whether there has been an exposure to the coronavirus, because meat packing plants have been considered the weakest link. They've been a hot spot for the virus. Not knowing what is happening inside of those plants is really telling of the trajectory of meat moving forward. So we what we need to do is what this requires really, honestly, is a complete redesign of our subsidy system. In most countries, the large commodity agriculture that's being supported is really on the largest scheme possible. They're on the largest scale. So you're having the small mid-sized farmers and the small mid-sized farms in general not being able to have that support. So we really need to redesign our subsidy system in totality. I don't think we need to be worried right now about the shelves being restocked, or if there is enough food. There absolutely is enough food. But we do have to think about our approach in a different way. We don't know the ramifications of COVID-19 right now. We don't know if it's going to be the same that what happened with African swine fever. We don't know that. We don't know how the price spike is going to be, but we're not on the best track. So we need to take a closer look at what we are purchasing and what makes the most sense.
Okay, so in relation to that then, Caroline, with meat consumption projected to rise in several parts of the world, how do you think global meat production could have by 2040? What steps are necessary to realize this target?
Thanks for that. Yeah, you speak to the brand that I represent, 50 by 40. We're a global collective impact organization. And our aim is to reduce animal production and consumption 50% by 2040, ensuring all remaining production is regenerative, humane, environmentally, socially sustainable, achieved through a just transition of the food system. Now, I just said a lot of a lot of terms. How we do that is going to take a lot. We do not have an easy task on our hands, especially with political will in this country and information access and just a number of issues that we have here and in other places around the world. 50 by 40 takes the approach that, we need incremental and systemic change. We can approach this and need to approach this from different perspectives, whether it's the plant-based foods industry, whether it's trying to break up the large multinational food corporations, a lot of different things. So we see it as there being important kind of tiers of engagement, whether that's thought leadership. We need huge thought leadership in this field on shifting financial flows, as Jillian was talking about with the subsidies, the multilateral development banks that fund so much in developing countries around the world to boost their economies. So much of that is going in the wrong direction of what we would see as the climate-friendly, equitable, sustainable future. So we need to shift those financial flows into truly sustainable, more community, more localized, climate-friendly food systems. We need to build our base massively. We, as a movement, we have natural allies with so many groups, with social justice groups, with workers' rights groups, farmers groups even. We've corporate industrial agriculture has done an amazing job of isolating all of these actors, health practitioners, environmental people working on environmental issues, just on racial justice, on and on and on. Done a really good job of pinpointing little things that we might disagree about, but the huge elephant in the room is industrial agriculture, and we have to dismantle that. How we go about dismantling that systemically, incrementally, we need to do both at the same time. We have to shift narratives. We need, importantly, we need lots more donor funding in this space. So that's one of our goals also, is to really get big climate donors, environmental donors, to see that this is an area that needs investment and needs to be more funded. So those are a few things to get there, but working together, collaborating, finding the middle ground, that's huge. And also trying to shift narratives, as other panelists have mentioned, our relationship with nature, our relationship with animals. what we're doing is not compatible with anything that is sustainable. We do not have a planet of unlimited resources. We cannot have unchecked growth. That can't happen. We have to be realistic, follow the science, and listen and work together.
And you said shifting the narrative, changing the narrative, and that really starts with the mindset, right? So Dr. Sweta, this next question, it really speaks to me. I can go from hardcore vegan for days to then vegetarian to then pescatarian. And then sometimes, dare I say it, I just want chicken. So I'm consciously making these decisions, well aware of the ramifications. So from climate change to food insecurity to the global pandemic, why do people behave in ways that increase risk, even when we are aware of the consequences? For example, why do people eat meat when they know it's not great for their health or the planet?
Because it's incredible what our brain is capable of tricking ourselves into.
Yeah.
So let's just start there. So our brains more closely resemble our ancestors than they do the supercomputers that they would need to resemble if we were going to be able to really process the complex, interconnected risk landscape that we as humans have created since the Industrial Revolution. Our brains are still designed in the way that our ancestors would, as they were setting up communities and creating modern day society. You would see a snake, you would see a tiger, you would immediately run away. That was system one, as it's referred to in the behavioral science community, also known as the fight or flight response. And that worked out for a really long time. It made sense to make snap decisions, to think, very quickly on your feet, to be able to survive and thrive in a relatively simple, now as we can compare to modern day, in a simple risk environment. Since then, look at everything that human beings on a day-to-day deal with. And it's not just, we have the luxury to think about the complex interconnected systems of the environment, of the food supply chain, of healthcare, water scarcity, and the implications on that on violence in communities, and then human migrations at a larger scale. But most people day to day really are just trying to get food on the table and are truly just having to make decisions to be able to ensure that the most innate, intrinsic needs of themselves and their families are met. And we can't get upset or mad at people for that. And one takeaway I want to make sure that we have from this discussion, which is so timely and important, is that we need to be compassionate and we cannot judge people. So what you just said is exactly right. We're going to see a lot of what appears to be indecisiveness, what appears to be, okay, I'm trying vegan, but then I'm going to fall back on to what I have grown up with, what I'm used to, what is prescriptively and socially considered normal. This is sociology 101. People are parts of their groups that they identify with, and that's a powerful factor. Again, I go back to our ancestors. If you were left alone in the wild and you were in that situation where you saw a snake and had to run away, that's not a good situation to be in. You want to be part of a tribe. That is very integral to your survival. We haven't changed that much. We still really rely on our communities. And if our communities aren't encouraging or supporting a behavioral change, it's going to be hard for us to be able to consistently take on that change and that behavior. So I commend anyone who's trying. I commend if you are coming from a family that eats meat, that eats fish, that you are making the effort to become more plant-based. And let's encourage that and support that, recognizing that we are in a fight against our brains at all times. And we can take on, and we'll talk about this some more, there's definitely things we can do to move that along, to catch up to the risk environment we find ourselves in. But let's just also be a little compassionate with ourselves. But we also don't have time. The planet is warming quickly. We see what COVID did. It's completely devastated the globe. So we need to speed things up, but also take into account that we do have our cognitive limitations.
Yeah, and this emotional eating, which is a whole nother discussion.
I hear you there.
Jillian, do you want to chime in? No? Okay, no problem. Quite okay. Okay, so on that note then, let's talk about plant-based diet. Right. So Deanna, how does a plant-based diet compare to other diets that include animal products but are also still considered healthy?
Yeah, so I've seen endless diet trends. And so what other diets focus on is what they're taking out. So either they're taking out fats, for instance, or they're taking out carbs, So fats play such an essential role in our body. So we have trillions of little cells throughout our body, and each cell is surrounded by a layer of fat. So that decides what nutrients go in and what waste comes out. And so if we don't have fats, we don't have the structural component of those cells. Fats are also responsible for the absorption of those fat-soluble vitamins. So without fats, those vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K, those aren't being absorbed. And so we need fats. And then we also, on the other hand, we need carbohydrates. That's what gets us up in the morning, what gets our brain thinking. And so we either have one extreme or the other, where we're eating things like bacon and coffee with butter for breakfast, yet we're not even able to eat an apple because it has too many carbohydrates. So there's just so many extremes for this. And that's why I love the idea of a plant-based diet, because there's no defined definition of what it is. So each of us here have a different definition of what it is, and it more focuses on what we're adding in. So we're adding in primarily those fruits, those vegetables, those beans, legumes, some whole grains, nuts, and seeds. And it's easy for all of us to live a life of plant-based. Like even the term vegan. So vegan seems very restrictive for some people. And so there's also different types of vegan. So there's a healthy vegan, and then there's also the snack food, more processed type of vegan. And so that's why I like the idea of plant-based, because we're focused on plant foods, real foods, whole foods, and that's what's nourishing our body. And so that's why I think that this terminology is so easy for people to adapt, because it's more achievable and it allows a little bit of wiggle room every now and again. So which is achievable long term. So
Deanna, vegan soul food is a thing. Vegan fried chicken. It's a thing, okay?
There's no judgment here.
That's right. Thank you. So Udi, welcome back. Question for you about, I wanted to shift a little bit to the technology of it all. Can you talk to us about innovative food technology and how it's contributing to a more sustainable future?
Yeah, absolutely. That's central to obviously how we approach the food system at eatjust, but it is also something that's been going on for thousands of years with farmers and chefs and just people eating, close to the earth. So I think most importantly, we should be thinking, as others have said on this panel, just to eat a diverse diet and look at the food that you bring into your body as kind of as your engine, and it just really is true that you are what you eat in so many ways. And so from a food technology standpoint, we've gone light years ahead from where we were just a few years ago. And our company specifically utilizes the power of plant proteins to identify functional applications in food systems. And a lot of other companies have done this. I think we've kind of led the way in building libraries of plants that we then screen for all sorts of different applications. And that's how we discovered things like the mung bean, which is what we make our Just Egg product out of. Super exciting to talk about that. But in general, technology has come a long way from a culinary standpoint. People are looking at things in the kitchen in ways that they never have before. At the processing and engineering at scale, we're identifying innovations and coming up with really new, exciting new ways of making plant protein available to people. More than anything, though, it's about making food that's incredibly delicious and that people can identify with and really enjoy. And that's happening at a rate of innovation that has never really happened before. I don't think the plant-based offerings 10, 20 years ago, when I became vegan when I was 17, and by the way, I no longer am for many reasons that have been identified here, in terms of diversity of diet and so forth, just being conscious about what you eat in general and local and sustainable food that you want to choose to put in your body. But food has just come a long way. And so now, for example, with Just Egg, we take the mung bean, we isolate the protein, we mix it with water and oil and make a product that looks, tastes, feels exactly like real chicken eggs. And now we're actually out competing many other plant-based products and competing with chicken eggs in grocery stores across the country very successfully. And so the technology has really, really come a long way. The more people are excited about it, the more financial incentives there are for companies to continue to innovate and grow, the more growth you'll see in the technology space. So it's just right now is like the boom of this time.
Uh-oh. I think Udi's frozen, but let me tell you all, I got my Just Egg delivered this morning, and as soon as this is over, I'll be making a veggie omelet. Thank you very much. So I'm excited about Just Egg. Until he comes back, because he had a lot of great things to say, I do want to jump into you, Jillian. You recently worked on a report with Yale, climate change.
Price parity with other proteins.
Okay. Did anybody hear Udi? The end of him? Was I talking over him? Okay, you cut out like the last 30 seconds. Yeah, we lost you for about 30 seconds. If you want to go back really quick and finish that last part.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think the goal of all of that innovation, if you can hear me, is to bring the price down so that everything is competitive with chicken eggs and meat and so on and so forth. And that's, I think, where this technology is going. It's going to allow us to create the most affordable, most accessible, most sustainable protein and other foods available in the world. And that's really where we see things going within the next just couple of years.
And that'll be great, because it's really important to be able to have this level of this available to lower income families, because there's always been such a huge disparity with the affordability of healthy eating. And so I think that would be great. Jillian, you recently worked on a report with Yale, Climate Change in the American Diet, that surveyed Americans around plant-based diets and the environment. Can you tell us a little more about the report and discuss your findings?
Sure, absolutely. So this report really stemmed from, us as Earth Day Network as an environmental organization, really taking a closer look at the impact animal agriculture has. Most environmental organizations, like we talk about climate change, right? But we really never talk about climate change in the sense of how animal agriculture really impacts it. So Earth Day Network has really brought this conversation to the forefront. Food production generates up to 30% of total greenhouse gas emissions, and livestock in particular generates the highest levels of greenhouse gas emissions. And whereas the production of fruits and vegetables generate the lowest. So what we wanted to do, so Earth Day Network worked with Yale program on climate change communication to create this study of about 1,000 Americans in regards to their own diet and the environment. What we saw, which was interesting, was a willingness among Americans to want to eat less red meat. For most people in the United States, we are leading the world, unfortunately, in obesity and diabetes. So we wanted to take a closer look at what are the motivators. Health being the number one motivator from the survey as to why people choose the diets that they do, or why they would eat less red meat, or the willingness to eat more fruits and vegetables. Whereas environment, kind of falls 2 or 3 in terms of making changes to our diets. One thing in the report that was interesting, about 50% of folks surveyed think that a main course meal with that's plant-based cost more than a meal with meats. So there are these misconceptions around plant-based foods, the cost and the barriers. So we really tried to examine cost, taste, convenience, and what the motivators and barriers are to purchasing and eating plant-based foods, and really can take a closer look at knowing that, I think it was 49% of people in the survey have never been asked to go plant-based, or have never been asked to go plant-based for the environment. So it really made us take a step back and think about, okay, well, there's a lot of education that needs to be done here. There are so many questions, but what we can do is really start to link what we're eating to the environment, and being really intentional about that process. So the report is online at Earth Day Network. It's called Climate Change in the American Diet. And you could find it there, and it goes really into depth about perceptions and also misconceptions and barriers.
That's great. That's really great. So what I'm going to do now then is I want to start with Deanna, and I want to ask you about the average thing that a meat eater can do to smoothly transition into a plant-based diet. But then I'll pivot to Dr. Sweta, so we can talk a little bit about behavior changes that will enable people to make choices that are better for the environment, society, and themselves. So Deanna, talk to us. What can we do?
Yeah, so I definitely agree that both go hand in hand. So I'm glad that you're pairing us up here. But the first thing is just start off small. So I actually started becoming plant-based about 3 to 4 years ago because I was specializing in oncology, and I started seeing that research on the relationship between high meat consumption and certain types of cancer. And so it was quite frightening, especially seeing what my patients were going through physically and emotionally. So that's really what gave me that motive to move forward. And so that's what I would tell everyone, is just take that slow initiative. So start off with a couple days a week. So start off with 2 days a week, 3 days a week, whatever you see fit for you, because some people are going from eating meat every single day and looking at going from eating meat every single day to transitioning a complete 360. That's going to be very difficult for the general population. And so making those small steps, that's going to be extremely important. And the second piece is just getting in the kitchen. So experimenting with different foods, experimenting with different types of protein sources. So I love tacos. And so one thing that I love to make is tempeh tacos. So for those who aren't familiar with tempeh, it's just like a little block, and it crumbles down just as if it were like ground beef. So I replace recipes like my tacos with tempeh, and it's just a great substitute. So just learning different techniques in your kitchen, not getting scared to fail, because it's all about trial and error and learning what you enjoy. And so that would definitely be kind of my second piece of just getting in the kitchen. And then my third piece kind of just circles back into, why are you doing this? And why do you want to do this? Is it to make yourself healthier? Is it to give yourself more energy, to be with your family, to be with your children? Is it for the environment? What's your main motive behind this? And that's what's going to make this into a long-term change. So I definitely feel like those are my top 3 recommendations with moving forward with the plant-based diet.
Very nice. Dr. Sweta?
Okay, so I'm gonna.
You got it?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So I'll give you the answer you'll remember, and then I'm going to give you a little bit more context for those of you who want to understand the answer that you're going to remember. It's about forming good habits. And there's a book called Atomic Habits, which explains it in detail really well. But the idea, the real takeaway, is reduce friction, reduce the difficulty or any barriers to accessing plant-based or more vegan diets, whatever that might be for you. If that means meal prep in advance, if that means some sort of buddy system, getting rid of things that would be a barrier that exist in your kitchen already, you want to reduce friction. This is true for whether you want to start working out regularly, you want to go on a diet, regardless of whether it's plant-based or not, and it definitely applies to becoming more plant-based. So it's good habit forming, and the science behind it is really outlined well in this book called Atomic Habits. So I highly recommend that. Now, for those of you who want to go a little bit further and to really change not just this one particular thing, but generally to become more aware of why you do the things that you do, I recommend, and I'm sure this is detailed in the report Jillian was just talking about as well, because the center that studies at Yale, that does the communications work, really gets into why we communicate, how effective communication needs to address perceptions that we have, and then how those communications can overcome and change behaviors ultimately. So I challenge all of you to think about, what drives your perceptions? What are the innate biases that you have? Is there something that is repelling you from changing a particular habit? What is it that is so unnatural, which is ironic, but unnatural about eating plant-based as opposed to eating meat? We have these cognitive triggers that prevent us from doing things that are more aligned to the reality of the world and real risk, like caring about climate change, like preventing COVID-19 from coming out. We know theoretically that it's an issue, but again, we have these limitations, and those limitations and those triggers, here are some examples. One is if it's a slow threat or a far away threat, then it's just not something that registers with us, and it's not something that we would perceive and take any action towards changing. If it's something that is really salient and scary, we act immediately and right away. So like a plane crash or a terrorist attack, people want action, people want response, people immediately will jump to some sort of wanting to do something about it. That's not the case with switching your diet. That's not the case with addressing climate change. So those are innate biases that really influence our perceptions of risk that I challenge you all to think about deeply. Why do you have the perception you do around a particular risk or habit that you have? So not just about going plant-based, but literally think about it as it affects all aspects of your life. And then based on that, one step further, and the work coming out of Yale and that Jillian's done, is how do you then communicate? What role can you play? How can you recognize what it was unique, what misconception or erroneous perception you had that is then also characteristic of your group, your friends, your family, your community? And then you can really become a change agent, not just for yourself, but also really thinking about, here are effective messages that really target the particular misconceptions. Because the reason people are eating meat and not going vegan is not the same. If we assume it's the same across the globe or across communities, that's a massive disservice. We really need to tailor the message. And so think first, really challenge yourselves. First of all, get rid of the friction, make it easier for yourself to change your habits, and then really address your innate biases, and then start thinking about how to be a change agent in your networks.
And no judgment, right? No judgment.
And no judgment.
Jillian, get in on this goodness that Dr. Schutz is talking about.
Yes, no, I totally agree. So, and here's the thing, everyone is going to have a different journey. No one's journey is going to look the same. And that's what I tell people all the time. My journey looks very different. 7 years ago, I got really sick. My motivator was health, but in honesty, it was 3 parts. I got really sick. I knew I had to change my diet if I wanted to live a long life and if I wanted to be a healthier human being. So I was working for the Department of Agriculture at that time, and I was exposed to factory farms at the same time that I was transitioning. I unfortunately saw the mistreatment of animals. I saw chicken coops being by the thousands. That just disturbed me. And then my environmental carbon footprint. What can I do? What can I do to, the planet is warming. We are seeing erosion happening left and right. We are seeing hurricanes. We're seeing so many things that are changing in our ecosystems. And so for me, it started out as health, then it went to animal abuse, and then it kind of came full circle with my carbon footprint. So not everyone's journey is going to look the same, and we have to understand that. Everyone is motivated by something different. And whatever our journey is, we should respect that for what it is. And that's my bit of advice for for transitioning.
That's very nice, and it goes back to no judgment, right? I'd like to touch a little bit on the factory farms that you talked about. So, Caroline, in the U.S., legislation at the state and federal levels has recently been proposed to ban factory farms. What can individuals do to help pass such laws and otherwise end industrial animal agriculture?
Great question. Just give me 5 minutes, I'll tell you.
You got it. Let's go.
Got all the answers. Yeah, I would say, depending on who you live with in your situation, in whatever way and whatever version, get to the streets, get engaged, get involved. We're seeing the power of that. We've seen that with Fridays for Future and climate change. We're seeing this in reaction to George Floyd and a myriad of other murders of people of color. The power of taking to the streets and elevating your voice publicly. And let me stipulate, in those places where people are able to do that without fear of reprisal. That's also obviously a huge concern in much of the world. We need to exercise that voice and that we want change. I think again, I appreciate what's been said about our bias and what's what fire is happening right now is kind of where our mind goes to. So the food issues with food have been more on people's minds. It's very, I think it's very simple things like finding a local group. If it's in your city, your community, your state, there are groups in every state working on sustainable, equitable agriculture, trying to transition farmers that want to transition to better systems or shift from animal production to plant production, or shift from say dairy to oats or some other plants. There are groups representing farm workers in the food system, whatever you can do to get involved, because those groups are working, have those networks and those connections and engagements. So connect with them, find out who your local representative is, call them, introduce yourself to their staff. It's general, I think with any social justice issue, it's about the work. It's about that dirty, grubby grassroots work. That's what brings about change. We just had, as all of you know, I'm sure, I'm from Atlanta, and we just had an amazing civil rights leader, John Lewis, pass away last Friday. And coverage of him obviously has been, there's been a lot of coverage of him and his amazing work and his compassion for people that hated him or expressed hatred towards him. Like, when I get frustrated or in my own little world for whatever reason, I try to think of those that have come before us and have faced so much adversity and have had that compassion. So I do think that's hugely important also, to demand change, but be compassionate at the same time, and call out things that you see, follow science, and look for those local groups that are working on these issues, I would say.
Be bold and unapologetic. That's what I hear, Caroline. So, Udi, let's talk about what must happen for plant-based products to become completely mainstream and accessible. When do you anticipate that shift to occur? And what's a development in the food tech space that you're particularly excited about? Tell us.
Yeah, great. Well, I just want to echo what Dr. Chakraborty said, which is so true, and it's been our philosophy forever, which is make the good thing the easy thing. Like, make it incredibly easy for people to make choices that are healthy and that are better for the planet. And that's the philosophy behind what we're doing and behind what a lot of other plant-based companies are doing. I think we're doing a really good job of it, if I may say so, because we're seeing such growth in the market, and the future is incredibly bright in a lot of ways. I think, like, stepping back, the COVID-19 really offers a unique opportunity to transform the global food system and make it resilient to future shocks, ensuring environmentally sustainable and healthy nutrition. And that, the pillars of that in my mind are really, things like creating resilient food supply chains, which is something that the plant-based industry is able to do well, because it's making new connections with farmers that are giving them new opportunities to grow new crops, like legumes and pulses, and giving them a market for those kinds of things. The second would be promoting healthy diets, as we've been speaking about. Regenerative farming is incredibly important as well, creating soil capture in the soil in farming systems, and then general conservation programs. Those kind of things are going to really, I think, help to promote a different food system, and now's the opportunity that we're in different parts of that we're working on as a community. Specifically, what's really exciting in plant-based foods. I mean, we just released an impact report, Earth Day, and back in April, and it highlights the fact that using plants instead of real eggs, we save over 98% of the water that's consumed by raising chickens and chicken eggs, over 95% of the CO2 emissions, and other equivalent greenhouse gases. And like 85% of land is saved by growing the crops that we use to create plant-based eggs that people can't tell the difference from chicken eggs. So that's incredibly powerful. We've sold the equivalent of almost 50 million eggs in the US alone just in the past few months. So that's something that we're really excited about. But I think generally speaking, there's a lot of innovation happening. We're also one of the probably the leading company in cultured meat, hoping to bring a product to market very soon. And that's an incredible opportunity to create real meat with a tiny fraction of the impact of slaughtered meat. So things like that are you're just gonna see that more and more, and it's really, really exciting.
Well, I'm Caribbean,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm waiting for like a curry goat alternative that I can.
Cool. I'll let my chefs know.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stick with you for a second, Udi. Your company, eatjust Inc., makes a clear link between zoonotic disease and a broken food system. I understand you have a powerful short film called Beasts that illustrates this link. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we really do believe that, as has been brought up before, that the challenges of we've completely transformed the planet, as we know, and by intermingling so closely with animals in a way that's truly not healthy, as compared to how we have been for millions and millions of years, in totally unjust, confined animal feeding systems, and things like the wet markets that have transmitted diseases. We've created a lot of problems for our food system and for human health, goes without saying. So this film that we just put together and we'd love to debut with Earth Day Network is just a beautiful, powerful film that highlights that connection, highlights the history of zoonotic disease and how it's emerged and how it's affected our food system and how it's been really driven by the way that our food system is structured. And so we encourage people to watch it. I think it'll be shared in an email to all registered participants, people that registered for this webinar, and definitely check that out. We think you'll enjoy it. It's like 5 minutes long. It's pretty fun.
Okay, good. I was just about to ask you, where can we see it? So everybody should be on the lookout for it in their email. I'm gonna ask one more question and then we'll go to the Q&A. Dr. Sweta, how will the introduction of cultivated or cultured / cell-based meat impact the food system and perception?
I'm really fascinated by this technology because there's only 3 things that we can look towards to really overhaul agriculture as we know it that is necessary given the speed to which we are reaching what global science consensus says is the max global temperature warming that we can withstand. We shouldn't get past 1.5 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels at all. And that's what we were aiming for by the end of the century. And right now we're on target to reach that by mid-century. So by 2050, nothing has happened. Even COVID-19 is a blip in the warming trajectory that our planet is on. We stopped smoking 1 cigarette on the path to lung cancer. It didn't change anything. So I hear a lot from people like, oh, but look, energy reduction in the year 2020, only to come back that much more aggressively next year and then down the line. So we really need to look at agriculture and the role that agriculture plays. Jillian explained that right in the beginning. And we're increasing protein intake, animal protein intake, the UN estimates by 70% by 2050. So these 2 massive statistics are really at odds. So what can we do? We have to keep all our tools in our toolkit. We can become vegan globally. We can think about regenerative agriculture. And then we can think about cultivated meat. And so I don't think we have the luxury at this point to take anything off the table. And cultivated meat is really where I think technology is going to be a massive disruptor. Just yesterday or 2 days ago, KFC announced that they were introducing Beyond Fried Chicken. That was cool. I was excited about that. I reposted it saying, let the revolution begin, because they're also there. I mean, we need to partner with private sector. There's no way we can do this without them. And so if KFC and the major meat companies are making that efforts towards introducing these technologies, plant-based or cultivated meat technologies into their product lines, then that's something we need to get behind. So I look forward to seeing how the same way our phones are now our cameras, and that happened within a generation, and how 99% of the world use landlines, and now it's like 99.999 something percent of the world uses mobile or text for communication. We can see that speed of disruption. And so that's where cultivated meat, once it reaches that price point and scalability, it really serves as a potential disruptor, especially when it comes down to the reality of how much protein is going to be consumed by 2050.
Okay, well, along those lines, we had a great question from Alan in our Q&A chat. He says, I'm fascinated by what Dr. Chakraborty said about our bad practices with animals. What action should we be taking now to avoid things like COVID-19 in the future?
Okay, so I work with a group called EcoHealth Alliance. It's based out of New York City, and it does global surveillance and mitigation of infectious disease around the world. And it surveys hotspots, so potential zoonotic disease transfer from, again, bad human behaviors and interaction with animals. We as consumers can recognize what products we're demanding and what we expect out of our food supply chain, and reduce the likelihood of those interactions from ever happening in the first place. China happened to be where COVID-19 broke, but the Arabian Peninsula is basically where MERS came from. We know that HIV from and Ebola came out of Africa. It doesn't matter. Globally, wherever there's diverse ecosystems and humans are venturing out further than they ever had before to clear land to produce animal feed or cattle ranching or whatever it might be, those not only is what's happening bad for the planet in terms of the primary impacts of the activities themselves, but now the secondary and tertiary impacts is what we're seeing, which is the potential interaction with new environments, with new animals that can result in a disease emerging. Additionally, this is what really does keep me up at night. We are seeing, because the planet is warming, it's this vicious feedback loop, and we're seeing decaying the frozen permafrost that exists around the world, in the Arctic especially, we're seeing that slowly thaw. And what is being released that has been frozen for millions of years? There's gases, there's microorganisms that, again, humans have never interacted with as long as we have thrived as a species. So there is really a lot of unknowns that are being just that much faster brought to the forefront, and we are not ready or prepared. But what we can do is to manage our demands as consumers. We can say we are not interested in wildlife trade. We can say we don't need exotic parts of animals for various final products. We don't need to engage with animals and put them in situations that are completely unnatural. We're really messing around. We're really creating these breeding grounds, and we don't necessarily know what's going to come out of them. And then additionally, we can just be smarter. We can, as a global community, recognize that once a disease reaches the surface, like COVID-19, it's really hard to control and contain. Despite our best efforts, COVID-19 is out there. It became a global pandemic. We knew about it months in advance, and we did our best to try and contain it. But look at where we are. Everyone on this call and tuning in is in some version of lockdown, right? Still, months later. So we don't want to be playing catch up. We need to proactively prevent from these diseases to ever come out in the first place. That means coming together, recognizing again, what is it that we're demanding? What is it that we can live without, that we don't need? And changing every aspect of the role and relationship we play with society and the environment. And that's on us. It's our demand.
Thank you. We have a question from Nabila from Michigan. For someone who is diabetic, how can they manage their diabetes on a plant-based diet while not only eating foods high in carbohydrates? Deanna, can you tackle that for us?
Yes, absolutely. And that is definitely a great question to ask. And that brings us back to the main concept behind a plant-based diet, and that we're adding whole foods, we're adding real foods. And so when we look at the glycemic index, so we see on one end we have low glycemic foods, so that's things like sweet potatoes, oatmeal, and those have a low impact on our blood sugar. Whereas at the other end, more refined processed foods, so things like pop or vegan gummies or pretzels, things along those lines, those impact our blood sugar levels. So if we're having for breakfast oatmeal, it's going to slowly release into your bloodstream, help you sustain that blood sugar lasting from breakfast until lunch, as well as giving you that feeling of fullness. Donut for breakfast, you might feel a little surge of energy after you eat it, but shortly after that just plummets. You're tired, you're hungry, and you're barely making it into lunch. So we can see that actually including a primarily plant-based diet of whole real foods can give you that sustained, those sustained blood sugar levels. And what's interesting is that in the early 2000s, the National Institute of Health conducted a study to control these blood sugar levels. And so what they did is they looked at a plant-based diet controlling calories and carbohydrates in comparison to just controlling carbohydrates and calories. And they noticed that those who are on a plant-based diet, their health was dramatically improved. So they had increased insulin sensitivity. They had some weight loss associated, and overall they had improved hemoglobin A1C levels. So we can see that including these plant-based diet can be extremely beneficial because you're overall improving your body's reaction to carbohydrates, and you're not having these ups and downs consistently, because real foods aren't meant to do that with our bodies. So it's completely achievable, it's possible to do that, to maintain those blood sugar levels, to even get you out of that high level of hemoglobin A1C where you're not even considered diabetic anymore. So definitely possible to do that.
I'm on mute. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah.
So we have an anonymous question. I understand that meat-like products are important for private enterprise to partner with us, but isn't it important to clarify that meat-like and dairy-like foods are not necessary for optimal nutrition with a whole food plant-based diet? Anybody want to jump in there and dissect that one?
I can definitely touch on this one here. And so when we are looking at foods like that are, yes, they're plant-based, but they might be a little more on the processed side.
Yeah.
We're not going to look at them as, oh, this is so nourishing for my body, but we're going to look at them as, okay, firstly, these are better than if I were to eat a meat plant source, but I'm not going to use it as my nourishment with my meal. So maybe I'll add something, a side salad with it, or maybe I'll add some fruits or vegetables and just optimize kind of around this meal. So I'm not looking at that specific meal as at that specific food product as nourishing, but so much better than if I were to have an animal product.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Jillian.
I want to jump in for a second, because there's been a lot of questions asked about in terms of like a regular like burger, meat burger versus a plant-based burger, especially ones that are on trend right now, the Impossible Burger, Beyond Meat. No one's saying a burger is healthy. Like, we're not saying like a Beyond Burger is a health forward food. But what it is better than the alternative. When you talk about land, when you talk about water resource, when you talk about the carbon footprint, both are processed. You know, if you have a 1/4 pound of beef, you definitely have cholesterol. You know, heart disease is the #1 cause of death in the world. It's definitely the #1 cause of death among women. So if you're taking a closer look at what you're eating and saying, oh, well, this is processed, how is it healthy for me? No one's saying that these burgers are healthy, but it is a better alternative to having like a 1/4 pound of beef. So I think there's like there's a misconception there when people think about it. But if you think about the overall impact, it's obvious a plant-based burger, however you look at it, is better than the alternative.
So neither one is healthy.
No.
One is healthier, or one, the lesser of two evils, basically, right?
Right.
Udi, let's ask you, a question came in from you from Adam. Adam said, you mentioned the plant-based egg manufacturing industry. What's the carbon footprint like, and do any of them use renewable energy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the carbon footprint of all plant-based foods is generally going to be quite a bit smaller than animal-based foods. The reason, of course, being that we're not just talking about the food itself and the manufacturing of the food itself, but we're talking about all the resources it takes to create that food. And with animal production, you're talking about feed, and over 80% of all grains grown in the U.S., for example, are grown just to feed animals, and that takes a tremendous amount of water and CO2 emissions and so on. It's just alarming how much the impact is. So when we talk about how our Just Egg product consumes 98% less water, 95% less CO2 emissions, it's really because that we're just taking the plants, we're turning them into eggs and feeding them to people, and that process, the water intensity, especially with it also depends on what crops you're using. I mean, it's among plant-based proteins, there's competition among those themselves as well, and there's a gradient of resources required to produce them. And mung beans that we use for Just Egg happen to be incredibly sustainable. They're super drought tolerant. They're very low carbon footprint. So they actually allow for a really small footprint in the product. Isolating the protein is really the most resource intensive component in this, as well as many other plant-based products out there, but it pales in comparison to the impact of feeding chickens and feeding cattle. It's just out of control. You can see in our impact report at ju.st/impact the alarming difference and where that really comes from. So I think that's one big component of it. The way that people are innovating to produce, a big part of what we're trying to do in terms of agricultural production is another component of that, and working with farmers to create resilient ecosystems and resilient regenerative legume based food production systems that produce the proteins that we put in our products, is another big component of the environmental footprint reduction of products such as ours. So there's a lot of great benefit to it.
Thank you. I have a really important question for Caroline, but before I get to it, Rebecca wants the tea. She wants the scoop, Udi, from you on why you're no longer eating vegan.
That's a great question. So it's complicated, but I was vegan since I was 17, and then when I farmed for a large part of my life, running organic, diversified vegetable production systems. And when I moved to California, lived on an organic farm and helped to manage the vegetable production system. But we had an incredible animal husbandry program, and we produced as well as chicken production for local restaurants, and it was all open air. Everything was, there's a lot of actual benefit that animals have on land. It's not a question in my mind of how do we completely eliminate the interaction of humans with animals on farm systems. It's more how do we interact, and how do we create much more interdependent, beneficial systems. And there's a lot of benefit that having chickens, for example, on an organic farm has on the soil and the diversity of the ecosystem there, and promoting biology in the soil and so on and so forth. That said, we had chickens. We had a outdoor slaughter by hand, and I participated in that. And when I did, because I wanted to be involved and just kind of see where this food comes from and how it's produced, on the most sustainable way, really possible, I decided I wanted to try it. And in my diet, it just worked really nicely to have a small amount of specifically poultry, eggs, and dairy. I'm from Wisconsin. It's hard to cut those things out. And having that as a very small component of my diet on a regular basis, with whole grains and all the other really beneficial foods as well, just creates a holistic system that I personally thrive on. So, I think I say you have three opportunities every day to vote for the planet, and that's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And it's not necessarily one way of eating or another, but it's really about understanding what each choice has, in terms of its impact, and trying to find the most balanced way of doing things for you.
Thank you. I'm going to shift the conversation because I don't want you to get beat up in the comments. Dr. Schutzer said no judgment, so we're going to that's right. Caroline, question for you from Q&A. Is there a fear that more plant-based farming could lead to environmental degradation where farmers will move into animal habits to farm? I hope not, but if farmers see this trend, will they try to capitalize on it and possibly create more harm to the environment?
Okay, so the question, thank you. Thanks for this question. So the question is, if more farmers adapt plant-based farming, will more land, more forests be cut down, more land be encroached on? Excellent question. Great news. If we transition from massive, operations feeding animals, we free up a ton of land that can be better used to feed and more efficiently used to grow food to feed people directly. I think Udi touched on this a little bit before. And as a farmer, you know more than me. But there are so many places where, the Amazon gets a lot of attention. There's the Cerrado also in Latin America, the Chaco in Paraguay, many, many areas that are being devastated due to the growing demand for animal protein products. And it's not just cattle ranching, it's not just deforesting for cattle ranching, it's growing soya that not only feeds cattle in all sorts of places over the world, but feeds factory farmed fish, or I forget the word for factory farmed fish. Okay, it escapes me, but that pork, it's fed to pigs in Europe and chickens. It's tied to all sorts of animal production. So it's not just for beef. So I just want to say, just avoiding beef is not like the solving all of the problems. But yeah, so much less, there's a great, I'll try to find the Bloomberg article. There's an excellent Bloomberg article, I think 3 or 4 years ago, that showed how America uses its land. And like a third of the country is growing feed for animals, or uses ranch land, which is just insane to think about. Like, it shows the visuals and the breakdown of different industries and like how much land is dedicated to that. And it's mind-blowing how much land there's in our world. And I could go on with data forever. I love data. There's Oxford researchers that did calculated the amount of land in the world dedicated to animal agriculture. And the amount of agricultural land dedicated to raising animals is 77%. 77%. So we are using a ton of land to produce inefficient animal protein. So like the math is on our side here. The math is on our side for plant production.
Awesome, thank you. I have another question. Jillian, I'm going to punt it to you, but anybody feel free to chime in here. This is addressing the issue of food waste worldwide. They want you to address the issue of huge food waste worldwide that, if prevented, would address the issue of both hunger and environment deterioration simultaneously. So I don't know if I framed that right, but do you get, like, basically they're trying to say, if we address the issue of food waste on a worldwide basis, wouldn't that also help hunger as well as environment deterioration?
Oh, absolutely. And anyone feel free to join in.
Sure.
Yes, no, I mean, food waste is such an issue, just not just in this country, but around the world. And if we think about how many people that suffer from hunger and what we can do in that space could be the catalyst for actually being able to feed everyone in this world. So, I mean, we need to take a closer look at overspending, at composting. When we talk about regenerative agriculture, one of the practices is composting, and composting eliminates a lot of the food waste. And I don't think people realize that how easy it is to do. Or, if you're buying for a family of 2 or 4, some people buy for a family of 6 and ends up throwing out so much food. So on a global scale, we really need to take a look, but it all goes back to our food systems, right? We don't have food systems that are in place that can really identify a lot of the issues that we're having today. But there are some private sector companies that are trying to do a better job in the implementation of this, especially when it comes to our supply chain. But I don't know if this question is for like an individual footprint or a global footprint. But obviously, it's something that we all need to look at individually because the impact is pretty large, especially on the scale of what we're seeing.
It seems to be from a global perspective, so that's great, Jillian. Caroline, please talk about how animals are needed to restore the soils that have been degraded by industrial agriculture, which uses artificial fertilizers, pesticides, and tillage.
I was just looking at that question and thinking about it. Great question. I'm not an expert on the need of animals and how there are things like veganic farming that can rejuvenate soils, but to the scale of which that is realistically adaptable, I don't know that. You'd have to ask a soil expert. But certainly there are incredibly sustainable, well-managed crop livestock systems that exist all over the world. They happen to just not be part of the corporate agriculture agenda. So that's not being promoted as much as it should be. And we should be looking at traditional indigenous practices, people's cultures that have, by their very nature, been doing this for a long time and sustaining their environments and their communities for a long time. And ironically, those same systems are threatened by industrial agriculture and expansion and land, land conflicts, all sorts of things. So I would encourage you, yes, animals can be incredibly useful in our restoring soils. I think there are examples where they're not necessary, but then there's also the question of like, well, you don't have to, kill these animals for food. So it raises a number of issues, but yes, definitely. And we haven't talked about the whole pesticide fertilizer industry, which is innately, intertwined with corporate agriculture and its success. And buy this new product, you need this, that get farmers hooked on this endless cycle of debt and unable to really turn a profit. So yes, that is certainly a big part of the problem and the picture. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. Nutrition question for you, Deanna. How can older folks get the B vitamins and proteins that they need but cannot produce if they don't eat red meat? Are supplements the only option?
So that brings us back to the question is are you 100% vegan? If you are, then B12 would be the only micronutrient that I would be concerned supplementation wise. The other B vitamins are typically fortified in our grain products. So that I wouldn't be concerned with. And then what was the second part of the question?
They were asking if supplements is the only way to get those nutrients.
Okay, and so B12, that would be the only concern if you were 100% vegan, but otherwise you can get your other B vitamins from those fortified foods. But as well, it's if you are eating eggs or if you're having a little dairy every now and again, then you wouldn't have to supplement with that. But a B12, it's an easy supplement that you can quickly grab at your typical health store, and it's something typically I would recommend sublingual under your tongue, but that's something you can easily add into your regular routine.
Thank you. Dr. Shutta, question for you from Daisy Rodriguez. We need to continue to influence others, especially our children, to eat healthier. Any thoughts on what can be done there?
Oh, good, because I wanted to add a little something to what Caroline said and what Jillian said, and that actually leads into answering this question as well.
Okay, great.
So what Caroline was saying about the amount of land that is then used for animal feed, I just found this statistic recently and it blew my mind. So the inefficiency of the system of producing animal feed for chickens and pigs all over the world is it takes 9 calories of input into these animals to produce 1 calorie of animal protein for the final human consumer. That is so inefficient. So the technology that our cows, that our chickens, that we've created, basically, we've genetically modified the hell out of these animals to the point where they shouldn't exist. They exist because we eat them. And this is a very old gas guzzling clunker of a car is a good analogy. So the idea that we can actually trade that out for a much more efficient system that doesn't require 10 calories to produce one calorie of food that can actually be consumed, that is going to overhaul the system, and we really need to get behind and support it. So I wanted to add that we're just living in like the primitive age of agricultural innovation. And for what Jillian was saying about food waste, I look at it from a behavior, again, like a bad behavior. So how do we fix behaviors in a way that doesn't require necessarily this overhaul in agriculture? That's science, the amount of money that goes into coming up with these technologies. Science and innovation is necessary, but it's not the only tool. There are cost-effective ways. There's tweaks in our behaviors and decisions we can make that are much cheaper and have real impact. So in terms of food waste, an intervention, and this answers the question that was just asked too, an intervention that works incredibly well to get people to change their behaviors and make better, healthier choices and eat better food is just how the food is positioned, what the default choices are, how the foods are described, how they're named. So part of the school food programs that we saw doing really well in the last several years were the ones that just kind of adjusted where food availability was in a school cafeteria. It was easier to reach for and pick up a carrot that was also renamed the cool super carrot or something that made it sound fun and exciting. And that became an easier default choice for kids. Also, if you're able to give kids something like a credit card or like a card that's already prepaid where they could just scan it as opposed to buy healthier foods, as opposed to having to bring cash or something, again, creating that friction, but in the opposite way, making it more difficult to make the harder choice or the more unhealthy choices. So you want to put French fries further away, you want to make it harder to pay for them, and you want to make healthier foods available right up front, and you want to make it easy to buy. So that's the infrastructure that we can create. And then behaviorally, we can tweak how we frame and how we communicate about certain things. So change the names, make things like super carrots, make things like another example is an avocado used to be called like an alligator pear. Do we remember this, right? That was the original name for an avocado. Same with kiwis. They used to be called Chinese gooseberries. And those are unappealing. Nobody would eat them. The second you change the name and you adjust the way you communicate about something, it can explode. So with food waste, rather than throwing things away, and this is at the restaurant level, at the community level, even in your home, why don't we call some of those foods that would make it to the trash, rename them, and I actually wrote an op-ed on this, rename them as garbage chic. So now all of a sudden it's cool. It's like chic. Okay, this is stuff that we would waste or throw away, but maybe actually we can come up with something really creative here and come up with a meal for the family that isn't food parts that we would throw away, but that's something that we would, showcase on Instagram and call very garbage chic. I mean, I know it works. This is the kind of stuff that works. Yeah.
Yes, honey, it's garbage chic.
And Dan Barber, we all know, the chef, he had a episode on Chef's Table, and he has Blue Hill Farm in upstate New York, and he had pop-up restaurants in New York City that were like Michelin star multi-course dinners that were all just made on food waste, right? But it became a thing. Like, people were willing to pay hundreds of dollars out of pocket to go eat food that would normally end up in the trash. And just, it's stuff like that. We can be creative and we can be cost effective. These are communication tweaks. These are infrastructural tweaks based on how we know that humans process information.
Very good. Well, I'll tell you what, 90 minutes goes like that when you're having some good conversation. So this has really been a great dialogue that we've all had. I'm really grateful for all of the valuable information that you shared. I'm going to ask each of you to just give a 1 minute, 30-second roundup. What is it that you want myself and the viewers to know? What's our takeaway from you? Caroline, I'll start with you.
I would say, and thank you so much, Marcelle, for leading us in this great discussion. I would say focus on there's so much to focus on right now, or to think about and worry about and stress about, depending where you are in the world. Focus, if you care about food systems and healthy food systems, focus on the big picture. The details, of course, are important, and there are different groups working on different things. The sweet spot is dismantling industrial animal agricultural systems and corporate agriculture, in my opinion. That leads to so much devastation and inequality and destruction of nature, wild species, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So big picture is that, we run on factory farms and monoculture crops and Roundup. These are big things we need to dismantle, and dismantling the money machine and the under table deals with politicians. So focusing on food sovereignty, things that we can do individually, but also demand of our representatives, and demand that that corporations and people be held accountable for the pollution and impact they're having. That's what I would say.
Fantastic. Accountability is the name of the game these days. Mr. Udi?
Yeah, I just reiterate that we have 3 times a day to vote for the planet. And every time that you make a meal or go to the store is just to think about what you're putting into your body, and try to think about a little bit, okay, where might this have come from? What might this do to impact the planet and my health? And there's tremendous opportunity there to make, I think, the biggest difference. And that's coming from like a political organizer who knows, we can certainly make a lot of change in the policy arena. That's an incredible opportunity as well. I would say go to organizations like the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition and other groups like that to see what can be done on the policy level for sustainable agriculture. But every day when you go to the grocery store, when you make a meal at home, just try to think about, how can I reduce the intake of industrially produced animal protein, and try new things at the grocery store, new products that are out there, give them a chance. You'll probably be very, very impressed. And so think about how you have those opportunities every day to vote for the planet.
Thank you, Udi. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Deanna?
Yes, thank you. And so what I just want everyone to focus on is what you're adding in, what you're adding in to nourish your body, what you're adding in to benefit the environment, what you're adding in, not on what you're taking away. When we focus on what we're adding in, we're creating this good relationship with food that we can maintain long term. And that's what our goal is. We want to focus on kind of those little movements of, okay, I'm going to replace this each day, or I'm going to not put eggs in my baking recipe. And just those little pieces, they definitely make a difference. So focus on building and adding in instead of looking at the notion of taking away. You're muted.
Wait, I was muted. Me? Sorry.
Yes,
Dr. Shutta?
Yeah, so some of the most carbon intensive choices we can make are having children, having pets, flying around the world, and eating meat. And we, again, are not going to tell anyone not to have a kid. Can you imagine telling your friend not to get that puppy? And so we're asking people to think about not eating meat. And that's much more manageable. It's much more doable. But think about how full of contradictions we are. We can have pets and we can eat other animals, right? We can see animals in sporting games that are not necessarily good or beneficial for them. And in the same time, we can like give our cats like daycare and day spa massages and treat them better than we treat our own children in some cases. We're full of contradictions. And it's something that we are contending with because of the timeline, the urgency of the timeline of the planet warming. But we need to recognize that people are full of contradictions, but they're not bad people. So to, again, be compassionate with yourself and in communication with your networks, because eventually we will make the right choices and the right decisions, but we are forcing ourselves to speed up decision making in a short amount of time because of the nature of the challenges that we're facing. We're all finding ourselves in a situation that isn't necessarily what we're designed to be dealing with.
Thank you. Jillian, closing remarks.
Sure, closing remarks. So, just going back to what the topic, what the topic was, food supply, diets, the environment in the age of COVID-19. It has not been confirmed that COVID-19 has originated from bats or pangolins, but I think most of us know that it probably did. Most of coronaviruses and most of the epidemics and pandemics that we have seen all stem from eating animals. So one thing is clear, that the food that we eat needs to serve our bodies and the planet. So we need to take a closer look at what we're eating and how it's going to really, in terms of reducing the outbreak of the possibility of new pandemics. And all of us are in a very weird space at this time. So I think we have the time, and we can all take a closer look at what we're doing. But also, Udi talked about voting for the earth. That also means getting out to vote in November. Whoever you choose to vote for, we need to talk about ending subsidies in industrial agriculture. We need to talk about public directed investments into plant-based technologies. We need to talk about taxing animal products to incorporate environmental costs. So when you're going to the ballot, you really need to look at who you're voting for and what they stand for in terms of your environmental values. So I kind of I leave you all with that. And also, we really need to make the connection to our soil. The FAO they suggested that they predicted that we have less than 60 harvests left due to soil degradation. So we really need to take a look at regenerative agriculture, and Earth Day Network is really over the course of the next few months and next year, you'll see a lot more from us in terms of what that really means when we talk about regenerative agriculture and we talk about soil degradation and sequestering the carbon and what it means for the future of our food supply. So thank you, Marcelle, for moderating this conversation. It was
Jillian, you were preaching there for a second. I was like, okay, we have to have another conversation about November and that impact. So thank you very much. I just want to thank all of the panelists. You all were extremely, extremely important in this conversation. So thank you for your energy. Thank you for your insight. I really wish we could keep this conversation going. I'd also like to thank behind the scenes. You guys don't see him, but Halsey's back there making all of this magic happen. So thank you so much, Halsey, for your help. And thank you to Earth Day Network for facilitating this level of conversation. We hope to keep that going. We need it. We need it. And most importantly, thank you to all the viewers for your questions, for your engagement. Keep coming back. We'll keep having this conversation. We need to keep spreading the word and making sure that everybody can be the best versions of ourselves. So thank you all. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Thanks, guys. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.